She dismissed her quiet human bodyguard, then the galaxy's deadliest assassins came for her. Let me set the scene, because apparently nobody in this story is going to do it properly. Ambassador Lyrindra Vex of the Thren Compact was, by every metric her species valued, a triumph. She had silver-blue skin that caught the light like polished armor, for centuries of diplomatic lineage behind her name, and an opinion about literally everything, most of which she shared loudly and without being asked. She was smart. She was capable. She was, in this particular moment, standing in the middle of a state banquet on Thren Prime, about to make the single dumbest decision of her very long life. "You," she said, jabbing one elegant finger at the man standing quietly behind her left shoulder, "are dismissed." The man did not move. This was, in fairness, sort of his whole personality. His name was Callum Ashford. Human. 6 feet of unremarkable posture in a plain gray suit, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd of one. He'd been assigned to her 3 months prior as part of the new interspecies security exchange program, a diplomatic nicety nobody had actually wanted, least of all Lyrindra, who considered a human bodyguard about as useful as a decorative houseplant with opinions. Actually, less useful. The houseplant, at least, produced oxygen. "Ambassador," said Doskel, her aide, hovering somewhere between concerned and terrified, "perhaps this isn't the venue for." "He has stood behind me for 3 months and said maybe 40 words, Lyrindra continued, warming to her own righteousness the way she always did. 40 words, Doskel. I have had houseplants with more conversational range. I did not request a piece of furniture with a security clearance. I requested protection befitting my station, and instead the compact sent me the quietest man in known space." Somewhere in the crowd, a Yeltrix trade delegate actually gasped, which, for a species with no visible mouth, took some doing. Callum's expression did not change. He simply inclined his head a fraction of an inch, which from him counted as a full theatrical bow, picked up the single duffel bag he apparently always kept within arm's reach, and walked out of the banquet hall without a word. No parting shot. No wounded pride. No dramatic monologue about underestimating humanity. Just gone. And here is where I, your humble and deeply unbothered narrator, feel compelled to point out something the ambassador did not know, could not have known, and would come to regret not knowing with the specific intensity of someone who has just fired the fire extinguisher for being annoying during a small kitchen grease incident. Species that conquer galaxies, build trade empires, and negotiate treaties across 17 star systems still, somehow, cannot read a room. It is the single most consistent trait among advanced civilizations. Give them faster than light travel, sure. Give them the wisdom to notice the man who never speaks is never speaking for a reason. Apparently that upgrade is still pending. Lyrindra returned to her negotiations feeling, for the first time in months, unencumbered. Free. Delightfully unshadowed. She had absolutely no idea what she had just done. Allow me a brief aside, because I enjoy this part. Humanity, as a species, has a curious relationship with quiet men in gray suits. Every other civilization in this story sent their bodyguards with visible weapons, ceremonial armor, credentials the size of dinner plates, and a general willingness to remind everyone within earshot exactly how dangerous they were. Humans, for reasons that remain a source of genuine anthropological confusion among the Compact's finest scholars, prefer to send the ones who look like they sell insurance. Callum Ashford had, in a previous life that his file described with the enthusiasm of a parking ticket, served 14 years in an organization whose name does not appear in any database Lyrindra had access to, doing work that does not appear in any database at all. He did not mention this. He did not mention much of anything. This was, in a very real sense, the entire point of him. He was not fired because he was bad at his job. He was fired because he was good at it, and being good at that particular job means being invisible right up until the moment you very much are not. The Compact would come to understand this distinction within the next 6 hours. Doskel found her handoff paperwork problem approximately 40 minutes after the banquet, when he tried to route Callum's official reassignment through the security office and discovered that Callum's comm channel had gone dark. Not offline. Dark. The kind of dark that meant either someone had switched off every trace of themselves on purpose, or something considerably worse had happened. He's probably just annoyed, Doskel told himself, in the specific tone people use when they are trying to convince themselves of something they do not actually believe. Humans get annoyed. It's fine. Everything is fine. Everything was not fine. But we'll get there. Larindra spent her newly liberated evening doing what any recently unbodyguard diplomat would do. She enjoyed herself. She walked the embassy corridors without a silent shadow 2 paces behind her. She ordered a drink without someone checking it first, which felt reckless and modern and extremely satisfying. She told her private secretary, with no small amount of smugness, that this was clearly what freedom felt like, and if the compact security office had a problem with it, they could take it up with her. She did not know, at that particular moment, that 3 individuals had just docked at the embassy's private shuttle bay wearing matching black cloaks with a stitched insignia that looked like a scorpion doing yoga. I want to be clear that I am not exaggerating the cloaks. The Keshvant, a freelance collective of contract killers with a reputation spanning 11 systems and a client list that reads like a who's who of galactic grudges, had apparently decided at some point that their brand needed cohesion. Matching cloaks. Matching boots. A group chant they did before jobs that I refuse to describe because it will make you cringe on their behalf. They were, without question, extremely good at killing people. They were also, and I say this with love, enormous. Their leader, a broad-shouldered Threxian named Vok Amar, had been hired by a trade consortium furious over a deal Larindra had personally torpedoed 6 weeks earlier. The consortium wanted a message sent. Vok Amar's job was to deliver that message directly into Ambassador Vek's ribcage. The embassy's outer security, designed primarily to stop over-enthusiastic reporters and the occasional drunk delegate, did not so much stop the Keshvant as gently inconvenience them for about 90 seconds. 3 guards were disarmed with an efficiency that suggested this was not their first embassy. A camera loop was inserted so smoothly that the feed didn't even flicker. Vok Amar and his 2 partners moved through the halls with the confidence of people who had never once, in their professional careers, needed a second attempt. There was, notably, no quiet man in a gray suit standing between them and their target. That was rather the point of the exercise. Larindra realized something was wrong when the lights in her private office flickered off, right as her personal comm line went dead mid-message. She sat very still for a moment, the way you do when your brain hasn't caught up to the situation yet but your spine already has. Doskel, she said, into a comm unit that gave her nothing but silence. Security? Anyone? Nothing. I will admit, with the gentlest possible cruelty, that watching a woman who had spent the entire evening congratulating herself on her newfound independence suddenly discover exactly what that independence actually meant was one of the more satisfying moments in this whole affair. She had wanted no one standing behind her. She now had exactly that, in the worst possible sense. She barricaded her office door with a decorative bench that was absolutely not rated for barricading, called up every backup channel she had, and got static on all of them. Her hands, she noticed with some detached professional embarrassment, were shaking. For centuries of diplomatic lineage, and it turned out that under enough pressure, the shaking still showed up right on schedule. Somewhere down the hall, she heard something that was unmistakably a body hitting the floor. It was, it turned out, the first of only 3 such sounds she would hear that night, and none of them belonged to anyone on her side. Here is the part where I get to be smug on your behalf, because I know something Larindra didn't. Callum Ashford had never actually left the building. He'd left the banquet hall, yes. He'd walked out with his duffel bag and his unreadable expression, and by every appearance he was simply a man complying with his dismissal. What he had also done, quietly, without telling anyone, was pull the embassy's threat assessment reports from the last 6 weeks, reports Larindra had personally waved off as consortium posturing, and noticed a pattern that suggested posturing was exactly the wrong word for it. He hadn't left the system. He'd relocated 40 meters, to a maintenance stairwell with a clear line to the embassy's private wing, and he had waited, because in his considerable professional experience, threats that get dismissed have an extremely reliable habit of showing up anyway, usually right after everyone stops watching for them. He was not, technically, still employed as her bodyguard. He came anyway. When the first Keshvant operative rounded the corner toward Larindra's office, he found Callum standing directly in the corridor, hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like a man waiting for an elevator. "Wrong floor," Callum said. It was the first thing he'd said all night that wasn't a single syllable. The operative did not get a chance to respond. "I'm told the whole exchange took 4 seconds. I'm also told it involved a fire extinguisher, a coat rack, and one extremely surprised assassin discovering that gray suits, much like their wearers, are far more dangerous than they appear. Turns out the furniture bites. I promised you an action sequence, and I intend to deliver, though I will spare you the gorier specifics because frankly this narrator has standards." The second operative, a lean woman named Ket Saro who had killed for a living since she was old enough to hold a blade steady, heard the noise and came running with considerably more caution than her fallen colleague had shown. She found the corridor empty. This should have worried her. It did not, because professional overconfidence is a hell of a drug. She rounded into the stairwell and Callum was not there. He was, in fact, above her, having used the 90 seconds of confusion to relocate to the maintenance grating overhead, because if there is one universal truth about humans it's that we have collectively decided, as a species, that the correct response to almost any problem is to hit it very hard from a direction it did not expect. This philosophy has produced some of our worst historical decisions and, in this specific instance, one of our best tactical ones. Ket Saro did not see him until she was already on the ground, and by then the conversation was largely over. Vok Amar, to his considerable credit, was smarter than his 2 partners. He heard both of them go down in the space of about 90 seconds and did the sensible thing. He stopped, listened, and recalibrated. He was a professional. He had killed 40 people across 11 systems, mostly by being patient and rarely making the same mistake twice. He found Callum standing calmly in the middle of the hallway outside Larindra's barricaded office, not even slightly out of breath, holding absolutely nothing that looked like a weapon, because he hadn't needed one yet. "You are the bodyguard," Vok Amar said. It wasn't quite a question. "Was," Callum said. "Technically I got fired about 2 hours ago." Vok Amar considered this information the way a professional considers any piece of information that doesn't quite fit the plan. "Then why are you still here?" Callum shrugged, the smallest possible movement of the shoulders. "Contract ended. Post didn't. I want you to sit with that line for a second, because I think it's the whole point of this story," and Vok Amar, brief as his remaining lifespan was about to be, actually understood it. You could see it land on his face. This was not a man defending an employer. This was a man who had simply decided, somewhere long before this evening, that walking away from an unfinished job was not a thing he did, regardless of what the paperwork said. Vok Amar drew 2 curved blades that had reportedly ended 40 lives and lunged with the kind of speed that had made his reputation. It did not go well for him. I will not walk you through every detail, partly out of respect for the man's professional dignity and partly because Callum's approach to combat is, frankly, about as glamorous as watching someone efficiently disassemble a jammed printer. No flourish. No wasted movement. Just a series of extremely correct decisions made very quickly by a man who had made these particular decisions, or ones very much like them, more times than he cared to remember. The whole thing was over in under a minute. Larindra, having finally worked up the courage to move the decorative bench and crack open her office door, arrived just in time to see the last exchange finish, and to watch the man she had publicly humiliated 4 hours earlier check an unconscious assassin's pulse with the mild concern of someone confirming a package had been delivered rather than destroyed. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, saying nothing, because for possibly the first time in her diplomatic career, she genuinely had nothing to say. "You could have died," Callum said eventually, not looking at her, still crouched over Vok Amar checking restraints. It wasn't an accusation. It was closer to a weather report. "You came back," Larindra said, which was, admittedly, not much of a response. "Never left the system." He straightened up, finally looking at her properly for what might have been the first time all evening. "You dismissed me from the post. Didn't dismiss me from the job. Those are the same thing." "They're really not." She opened her mouth to argue, out of pure diplomatic reflex, and then closed it again, because arguing with the man who had just single-handedly ended 3 professional assassins felt, even to her considerable ego, like a bad use of the moment. "Why?" she said instead, and left it open enough for him to fill in whatever answer he wanted. Callum was quiet for a moment. "I'll admit, even I wasn't entirely sure what he'd say, and I've been watching this whole thing unfold. Had a post once," he said finally. "Left when I was told to. Told myself it wasn't my responsibility anymore. Something happened to the person I was supposed to be watching." He didn't elaborate, and something in his face made it very clear that he wasn't going to, not tonight, maybe not ever. "Decided a while back I wasn't doing that again. Whatever the paperwork says." Larindra, for centuries of diplomatic training notwithstanding, found she genuinely did not know what to say to that. So, for possibly the first time in recorded Thren diplomatic history, she said something simple instead of something clever. "I'm sorry," she said. "I called you furniture." "You did. That was unkind." "It was. I was wrong." Callum considered this, and something that might, in extremely favorable lighting, have been the ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You were," he agreed. "Also, for the record, houseplants produce oxygen." I checked. Not a great comparison. Somewhere behind me, in whatever narrative space I currently occupy, I laughed. I couldn't help it. Security arrived roughly 11 minutes too late to be useful, found 3 restrained Kesh Vaunt operatives, 1 extremely rattled ambassador, and 1 human standing quietly against the wall with his duffel bag back over his shoulder, looking for all the world like a man waiting for a bus. Doskel, upon arrival, took 1 look at the scene and immediately began drafting what he would later describe as the most complicated incident report of his career. "I assume," Larindra said, once the chaos had settled into the merely bureaucratic, "that you'll be reinstated. Effective immediately. With, appropriate compensation for tonight's overtime." "Appreciate it," Callum said. "Also billing for the coat rack. And the fire extinguisher. Both took damage." "Of course. And technically," he added, with the specific deadpan calm of a man who had been waiting all evening to say this exact sentence, "my contract ended the moment you fired me. Everything after that was off the clock. Unauthorized use of personal time to prevent an assassination. I'll need that itemized separately." Larindra Vex, ambassador of the Thren Compact, for centuries of diplomatic lineage, sharpest tongue in 11 systems, stared at the quiet human who had just saved her life for free out of what appeared to be pure stubborn principle, and started laughing, somewhat helplessly, because there was genuinely nothing else left to do. "Fine," she said. "Bill the compact for the overtime. Bill them for the coat rack. Bill them for whatever you want. Will do." He shouldered his bag properly this time. "Ambassador. Callum." He gave her that same small nod he'd given at the banquet, and walked out of the hallway, and this time, everyone in the building understood exactly what they were watching leave. "So here's your takeaway," delivered with all the sarcasm I can reasonably muster after watching a woman insult a professional weapon into unemployment and then get personally saved by that same weapon out of pure spite disguised as principle. Humans are not, on paper, the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest, the strongest, or the most technologically advanced. Ask any of the 11 systems that have tried to hire mercenaries against them, and they will tell you, usually through gritted teeth, that the actual terrifying thing about humans isn't their strength. It's that you can fire them, insult them, walk away, dismiss them in front of an entire banquet hall, and cut every tie you have to them, and some absurd percentage of them will still show up anyway, because somewhere along the way they decided that finishing the job mattered more than being thanked for it. Larindra Vex learned that lesson the expensive way, which, honestly, is the only way her species ever learns anything. Callum Ashford, for his part, filed his overtime paperwork, collected payment for 1 coat rack and 1 fire extinguisher, and went right back to standing quietly behind her shoulder the very next morning, saying almost nothing, exactly as before. Some habits, apparently, are worth keeping.